Hello, welcome to another video lecture that I've put together for you on the Document Standards Manual and how to put it together. Covered a number of things in my last lecture, but it was getting a little long, so I cut it off. And so here's the second part of that lecture. Okay, so one of the first things I wanted to talk about today is the different parts of this document. We talk about the Document Standards Manual being a formal document. And we're not talking formal in terms of the manner of writing, the tone of the language or anything like that. But it's formal because it has these different parts to it. It has what we call front matter, things that generally occur before the table of contents um, at the beginning of the document. And then we have the body of the document, and then we have the back matter for the document. So a formal document differs from an informal document such as a memo. So we can use memos for reports and interoffice communication, and they don't have that type of front matter and back matter. They might have some documents attached at the end in terms of back matter or appendices, but we don't have some of the different parts such as a cover, a table of contents, those sort of things. So I wanted to talk about these different parts here. And in terms of front matter, the body, and back matter, sometimes with back matter there's hardly anything there. But just know that it's part of the document and it's available to you to put different things into the document if you want to. So what I'm looking for in terms of front matter for this document, either before the table of contents or immediately after the table of contents, is I'm asking on this assignment for a message from the president. So this message is kind of a welcome message to the document. It's kind of fluff in that maybe not terribly hard-hitting information. As I say here, it's frequently ghostwritten, so it might be written by the Director of Communications or a Public Relations Director or something like that. And but sometimes when we say ghostwritten, it's got someone else's name put on it. So it'll say message from the president, but it wasn't written by the president. He may have read it over and said, sounds good to me, but he or she, pardon me. And but it kind of serves as an introduction to the document. As I say here, it's brief, kind of has an upbeat tone. It works like a letter of transmittal. So just about everything we've done this semester, maybe with the exception of the memo, has had a letter of transmittal. The employment packet, the job application letter, has become a much larger, more important document, but it kind of began as a letter of transmittal for your resume, to get your resume from your hands into their hands for the job that you're applying for. So we'll also use a letter of transmittal with the proposal assignment, again, to kind of get things from your hands into their hands. And the same thing happens with this document. So I said it's brief, has an upbeat tone, and so it might sound something like this, that the letter might say, welcome to our company, XYZ Corporation. You hold in your hand the Document Standards Manual or Corporate Communications Policy Manual, whatever you want to call it, and talk about the importance in a sentence or two of communications policies and branding and presenting a consistent image or brand to your publics, both internally and externally. And then it might say, please review the document. Keep it handy as a reference as you're composing different forms of communication. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact the Director of Communication for clarification. And once again, welcome to our organization. So it's extremely brief and has this upbeat tone. Welcome to the company. Here's the document. If you have any questions, blah, 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 and once again, welcome to the company. So, can be formatted like a letter, but doesn't have to be. And also, in terms of front matter, again, some of these come before the table of contents, but I see a lot of students want to put them immediately after the table of contents. So you could do the message from the president after the table of contents. The company overview, I'm asking for it to be 2 to 3 pages. Similar to the corporate communication, the organizational profile that we did for the employment packet, and maybe expand upon it. Toss in some images here and there that help to kind of set a tone. Images are helpful. We're going to be using certain images as kind of illustrative examples, but with the company overview or something, showing the company headquarters or people working together, smiling, it's an appeal to pathos to show people's faces, and so we want to project this image that this is a good company to work for. So the mission statement, you can make it up on your own. You can find their official mission statement online, whichever way you want to go. And generally less than a page, kind of a paragraph, and oftentimes formatted in a bit larger text. So we tend to go with 10, 11, 12 point for body text, but on the mission statement, you might actually use like 14 point text. And sometimes it's put in a box, and sometimes it's kind of somewhat centered on the page, maybe a little bit higher than center, what we call optic center, where your eye naturally goes when it looks at the page. And it's considered to be important enough to have its own page. So these are the elements of front matter. And then I think one thing I didn't include here is the table of contents, because the table of contents kind of doesn't belong necessarily to the front matter or to the body. And in fact, when we paginate a document like this, the table of contents doesn't even get a page number. So typically everything before the table of contents gets little Roman numerals for page numbers, and then everything after the table of contents gets Arabic numerals, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's front matter. Keep that in mind. And then the body, even though this is only half a slide here and the front matter was a full slide, the body is the bulk of the document. So these are our policy sections. I'd like to see you break them up into internal communications policies and external communications policies. And there can be some overlap. So maybe you'll have email policy internal, and then maybe you want to have email policy external. But letter writing, letters are generally used for external communication, so you'd put them there. Memos are generally used for internal communication, so you'd put them there. And you can think of as many different types of communications policies as you want. Kind of look at our text. That might give you some idea of policies and types of policies that you can use. I think chapter 14 in our text is about writing letters, memos, and emails, so you could draw upon a lot of that. I think chapter 20 in our text is about doing presentations, so like PowerPoint presentations. Those could be internal or external, so keep that in mind. And the website, I forgot what chapter that is in our text, but we did a website analysis. So maybe you've got some good policies that you want to use for what makes a good website. So social media, increasingly an important aspect of corporate communications. And so sometimes they govern things not only in terms of official organizational communication, but they may have policies about your private and personal use of things like Facebook. So no political messages on your personal page, or something. So some companies don't even like their employees being on social media. So you get to decide some of that. And trying to think of some other types of communication, especially in terms of written communication. I think I'm asking for 5 types of internal communication, 5 types of external communication, and at least 3 of the 5 in each category should deal with written communications policies, because this is a writing class. So think about, what types of writing an organization does, and sometimes there are specific types of communication for that specific type of company, for that industry or something. So maybe there are standard forms they have to fill out. Let's say you're doing something for a school district or something, that they might have things about lesson plans, writing those up, and parent-teacher communication, and some of these other things that aren't typical for a lot of organizations. So think about the type of organization that you're doing this for and what type of policies they have. You can also have, as I said, some non-written communications policies. So dress code is sometimes included as a communications policy. It's a text of sort, even though it's not a written text. Some oral communication, sometimes things about sexual harassment in the workplace, that's a big no-no, and that is a communications issue. So that could be addressed in something like this. So think about all the different types of communication that go on in your type of organization, and fill out these internal and external communications sections accordingly. So on each policy section, so think of internal communication as like a chapter, and then external communication as like another chapter. And then within those chapters, you're going to have these subsections, so different policy sections. And what I'm encouraging is that, let's say you're doing memos or something, that you have a brief paragraph at the beginning talking about the importance of this type of communication. So memos are used extensively throughout our organization. They help us to do X, Y, and Z, and A, B, and C, and maybe that they need to be formatted according to a particular format, not just, oftentimes email is oftentimes not really formatted that well. It's just kind of stream of consciousness, it seems. But we do have specific sections, different rhetorical objectives, and different parts of a memo. So you could talk about the importance of this particular type of communication. And then below that, I would like to see you kind of had some guidelines there. So I think maybe it's an oversimplification to think of them as just do's and don'ts, but sometimes that's a helpful way of getting it across to students. Is this might be a bulleted list of things, good things to do, what you should be doing in this type of document, what you shouldn't be doing in this type of document. And so intro paragraph, and then some guidelines. And then I'd like for these written policies that you have an illustrative example of some sort for the type of communication that you're writing about. So show me what show me what a good memo or a good email looks like. And then similar, like we did on the website analysis memo, use call-out boxes to help point out in this illustrative example what you're talking about in this document. So don't just say make your email look like this, make your letter look like this, make your memo look like this, because the reader might be confused. What exactly am I supposed to be paying attention to? And having the call-out boxes that kind of point to what they should be paying attention to, those are very helpful. Okay, and then lastly, the back of the document, after the body, we have what's called back matter. And generally, it's appendices, and it could be a glossary, it could be an index, by topic. It could include some sample documents, so sometimes people have to fill out specific forms and documents, and you can talk about them in the body of the document and then refer them to the sample documents at the end. Say something like see Appendix A or see Appendix B, at the back of the document. Could also be a list of references of some sort. For further reading about communications policies, check out these helpful sources. So that's kind of the overall structure of the document. And let me move along here. So wanted to talk about some examples, and I've got both professional examples and some student examples to share with you. Let me talk about some of the professional examples first. So hang on just a second. Okay, in terms of professional examples, I did want to point out to you that if you go to our Class D2L page and scroll down a little bit on these announcements, I have Document Standards Manual Assignment Sheet posted, Intro Video Lecture posted, supporting links posted. And so let me show you those supporting links. Let me just go into the content area. Okay, and we're in the Document Standards Manual, and so starting about here, I've got a collection of identity style guides from around the world. One thing I'm trying to tell students with this assignment is this particular document oftentimes goes by a number of different names. So I'm calling it Document Standards Manual, but it's also called Corporate Communications Manual, Corporate Communications Policy Manual, Corporate Identity Manual, or Corporate Branding Manual. So we're trying to develop a brand and be consistent about it. So I think that this first one has like 100 different style guides from around the world. So here's another one with 21 brand style guides, 36 brand guideline examples, 50 meticulous style guides every startup should see before launching. So if you need some examples, go there and look at those. I also wanted to show you that when I searched for Document Standards Manual online, one of the things that I kind of run into with this is that sometimes we get some technical standards. So let's see. Engineering, documentation, control, configure, management, and engineering standards manual, engineering document control. So a lot of these with engineering in them are not really what we're looking for. And then I did another search with Corporate Communications Policy Manual, and so I found several that were pretty good here. I'm going to talk about these. Communications Policies and Procedures from State University of New York at Delhi, New York. Managing Organizational Communication, another link there. Employee Communications Policies. Corporate Communications Policies. So sometimes you have to kind of weed through some of these to find the best examples. But let me show you some of the examples that I found. So this one is for SUNY Delhi, and I know the city in India is pronounced Delhi, but believe it or not, in upstate New York, the same spelling, and they call it Delhi. So Office of College Relations and Advancement. And so as you go through this, they've got an introduction, and you might think of this somewhat as like a message from the president. A successful college image is much more than a logo, and so they talk about the importance of these policies and standards, and kind of a fairly stark document in some places. We don't see headers and footers on this document. I do kind of encourage you to do that. But media relations, So maybe that's the first thing that they're worried about is what happens when the news media calls about some incident on campus and how are they going to handle that. And so, page after that, when a reporter calls, guidelines for communicating with the media. And here we have kind of a list of do's and don'ts. I see do not feel compelled to conduct a phone interview, do not speculate. So, obtain, notify, answer, make sure, remember. These might be do's that you should include. So, and then because it's an educational institution, they have the Family Educational Right to Privacy Act of 1974, otherwise known as FERPA, and Freedom of Information laws, and frequently asked questions for freedom of information. So, emergency communication, campus communication, mass email, photographs and recording, printing, business cards, electronic letterhead, social media, and the university logo, the athletic logo, the web policy, advertising. So all sorts of policies in here. Not many, actually 0 illustrative examples. Just the cover seems to be the most graphic part of the document. The rest of it's all text. Okay, and then I did another search, and I just used Corporate Identity Manual and Web-Based Brand Guidelines, Corporate Identity Manual. And then we see some of these collections of manuals, 50 Meticulous Style Guides, 36 Great Brand Guidelines Examples, Brand Identity Style Documents, 21 Brand Style Documents. So they're out there, and sometimes you have to search for them with different combinations of search terms and stuff. Hopefully you'll know them when you see them. So I also wanted to talk about some student examples, so let me show you those. Okay, this particular example is for a senior living center called Discovery Senior Living, Spring Mill. And it just says Standards Manual. It should say Document Standards Manual or Communication Standards Manual, because if we just say Standards Manual, we can it kind of sounds like some of those technical documents like engineering or something. But anyway, we have a nice cover for the document. We have a nice table of contents. As I hover over it, I see that it kind of turns gray a little bit, and that's because the student used the table of contents generator within Microsoft Word. I kind of show people how to set it up by hand. But we see the different major sections, the intro, and we could also, it's hypertextual, which is certainly helpful. But the intro, this is our front matter, welcome letter, company overview and mission statement. And then the body, we have internal communication and external communication. And there isn't really any back matter in this document. Also, it's kind of pleasing in terms of the use of color and such, different font sizes. But again, it doesn't really have a header and footer, which sometimes really works well as an extra textual element that helps to hold the entire document together. So look at our text as an example. Notice the headers and footers on the different pages and the different sections and how they're colored differently. So that kind of gives you an idea about that. And as we scroll through, there's some strengths and weaknesses of this particular document. But here in the introduction, this is again front matter. Didn't necessarily need to say introduction. But welcome to the team. This is kind of our message from the president, even though it's not necessarily signed at the bottom, and it's not formatted like a letter, but it is a welcome message. So, and we have a picture of the facility, the organization, their senior living center. Sometimes we put an image of the president or communications director down there. So also notice that it looks like it's single spaced throughout. You can go, I think, to 1.15 spacing or 1.5 spacing on this fairly safely, but don't double space this document. We want to make it look very professional and polished and finished, and so we generally don't have double spaced documents for that. So then we go to the company overview over here, and I like the fact that the student used, basically these are in Microsoft Word. If you go under, I think it's under Insert, and I'm not seeing it right now because some of these functions are turned off in this method of looking at the document, but I think it's under Smart Art that we get, this is kind of a flow or progression of things, and so there's some options for you there. Looks very nice. And then we have our mission statement, and I think this student could have put this on a page by itself, but it's fine just the way it is. Okay, so then we get into our first major chapter here, internal communication, and we see stuff about annual training. Note the use of a note at the top here. So we're kind of, it's got the I for information, so we're kind of alerting the reader to something before we kind of get into the content here. And the content is in a very readable fashion. We have paragraph and use of bulleted list, which make for quick reading. We also have, again, kind of some process things here about day 1 and day 2. We also have a pie chart here, and then we have more talking about team meetings and problem-solving procedure. And again, the student kind of did this information thing at the top of each section, and some text and some bulleted items. And then, again, a use of kind of a flow chart, another flow chart. Probably didn't need this bit of clip art over here, but it's okay. And what we're not seeing necessarily at this point are many what I call illustrative examples. So we'll see some more of those. But continuing on, code of conduct, and this internal communication is kind of acting as a header, a running header for this particular section. The informational items, some text, and then things in boxes and bullets. So again, making things easy to read. Use of some graphics that communicate instantly. Internal communication, again, dress code, and then the informational thing, the bulleted list, some discussion. And here we have our first real kind of example. So it happens to be dress code, so it's not written communication, but we see an example. We have the call-out boxes that are pointing out what we're supposed to be paying attention to. Okay, so now we're into external communication and social media. And again, really like the fact that this writer is using a consistent setup for this document with the information at the beginning of each section, some discussion, bulleted list. Again, kind of stuck on this process thing, but I think it works okay. We have one illustrative example here and a call-out box to talk about it. On the newsletter, again, basically same setup, and it works very well. A better example here of an illustrative example. So we're showing the reader what we're talking about, and we're doing these call-out boxes to draw their attention to them. We're not just saying, make your document look like this, but we're explaining what we want them to pay attention to. Okay, so, and I think we see that on these next two examples with the website. We're not seeing the entire website, but we're seeing some particular aspect of it with these call-out boxes. Advertising, this example down here at the bottom, illustrative example with the call-out boxes. And again, we see a very similar setup on each of these pages with the information and the discussion paragraph and the bulleted list and then the illustrative example. And then events, again, set up along those same parameters, works very well. and then the concluding part of the document. So one thing I like about this document is that it's a useful document. By that, I mean that it's something that you can come back to again and again to check on how to do things. So occasionally with this assignment, I'll see people develop what they think is a communications policy manual, but it tends to be more like a memo that you read it once and you kind of toss it aside. A good communications policy manual will be something that people return to again and again to help them do their job right. So that's one example. Let me see if I can find another example here. Okay, this particular example is for an organization, Publicus Healthcare, and we have our cover here. As we scroll down, we get the table of contents, and there's our welcome from the president. Maybe formatted a bit more like a letter, but with the Nick Colucci, CEO of Publicus Health at the bottom. But we don't have this, dear new employee at the top, although you could put that there. One thing I would do differently here is there's a kind of a layout rule with using photographs with people's faces in them, that if they're turned a particular way, we want to position the image so that they're looking into the document. So he's kind of turned a little bit to the left, so I probably would have put him over here on the right a little bit, maybe do some text wrapping, and so he's kind of looking into the letter, because the rule is that as readers, as viewers, our eyes tend to follow the eyes of the people in the picture. So if this were a left-hand page, our eyes might trail off the left-hand side of the page and just keep going. So we do see a header and a footer used in this document. And we have the mission statement by itself, again, in a box. The company overview might need a little more development. I think it's kind of like the organizational profile, and then it's mainly bulleted things, but I think that's okay. Internal communication, maybe a bit too much use of clip art sometimes, but we see the different sections. And then we have, this is the email page. I think that, this is sufficient for this assignment, but again, to make it a truly useful document, we'd probably want to elaborate on this a bit more. And you don't have to invent all these policies yourself. Many of them are borrowed, kind of common sense rules, such as don't type an email in all caps. It's considered shouting on the internet. So you don't have to cite that or try to put it in your own words. It's such a common rule out there that putting this document together is frequently about kind of harvesting good policies and putting them in your document. So we have the discussion. We don't have what I call the guidelines or list of do's and don'ts, but we do have a really nice illustrative example. So we kind of see an email here, and they're telling you what to do in the different parts of the email. So good execution there. The memo, again, we see some discussion and an example, but I think this could be made better. Meetings, we probably need more for this, but it's on the right track. Again, dress code, discussion and examples. And then, for some reason, this example goes off into some policies that aren't communications policies. So this is just supposed to be a communications policy document. It's not a general employee handbook. So we really don't need sick days, personal vacation days, etc. in here. Now we're into external communication, email and phone. I think each of those could have had a separate page and some more development. Letters, we have some discussion, but we don't have do's and don'ts or guidelines. But we do have a nice illustrative example here. And you don't have to keep each of these on one page. You can spread sections, subsections across a couple of pages. Client meetings, just some discussion, but I think some bullets or numbered list or something like that would be helpful, because this is kind of difficult to come back to for quick reference. You have to basically read all the paragraphs again. So think about how your reader, they're business people, professionals. They have busy work days, and they're not going to sit down and read a document from start to finish. They want to get in, find the information that they need, and get out. So think about the needs of your audience. Okay. Presentations. I think this needs more development, but it's a start. Company newsletter probably needs more development, but I think a pretty good start with some examples down here. And let's see what else we have. The back cover here. So I think that's a pretty good example. Let's take a look at another example. Okay, this one is for an organization called NatureServe, and it says Document Standards Manual on it, and a nice cover for the document. Then we have our table of contents and the welcome letter, or it doesn't even need to say letter up here. It could just say welcome. The mission statement is added onto the same page. I thought that was a nice touch there. And we do have kind of a complimentary close on the letter. Company overview looks good. Company, I like the use of a graphic here. Company history, and again, kind of the use of the flowchart type thing works well. Then we get into internal communication policies, and maybe a little haphazard in some of the layout, but and we have a typo here, network, but I think you get a good sense of what should be going on here and what some of the possibilities are for creating your own document. This page doesn't really tell me anything. It's a bit confusing. So conservation outings, and again we have some of these kind of flowcharty looking things down here. Nice use of images, all the same size, and then some discussion. Resource library, I think, and emails, I think by and large, very good. So here's our example and some call-out boxes. The student's trying to make this right. Oftentimes it's a matter of having more time and kind of living with the document for a while to really expand upon it and make it a useful document. But moving along. And then external communication, annual reports and newsletters, and we have some examples and some call-out boxes with those and some discussion. We have a list of guidelines here, bulleted. And moving on, some more stories and events, and social media. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We're basically kind of giving some guidelines there, some discussion, some examples. And the last page in this document is a signature page. So you're affirming that you have read and agree to abide by these policies listed in this manual, and you have to print your name and sign it and date it. And oftentimes you detach this last page and email it or send it hard copy, back to the communications director, saying that you've read everything and understand it. So that was one more example. Let me see if I've got another example here. Okay, this particular manual, something happened with the text up here at the top. Not sure what happened, the word manual. It is saved as a PDF, and I recommend that people do that because saving it, your final draft as a PDF, kind of takes a picture of the document. So how it looks on your screen is how it's going to look on everybody else's screen. But sometimes with Word documents, pagination in Microsoft Word is printer dependent. And so I see this a lot with students, that they create things on their computer and they're connected to a printer somewhere. And so, and then when I open it on my computer, some things happen, especially at the bottom of pages and the tops of pages, that something that you thought was that you moved to the top of page 3 somehow jumps onto the bottom of page 2. And it's because of the pagination issue with Microsoft Word. So if you save it as a PDF, it'll take a picture of your document and you won't have to worry about things jumping around. So I'm not sure how this happened here. But an attractive cover and table of contents looks good. The welcome looks good. It is formatted like a letter, and that's just fine. We see at the top of the document a header that's going to run throughout, and then different section headers. So table of contents and welcome. We also see our pagination down here. And company overview looks good. There's a little space down here, so you could probably work in a couple of images throughout here somewhere. Or sometimes people want to use an anchor photo, something that's kind of long and wide, down here at the bottom to take up this space, or up at the top, long and wide, that would kind of push some of this text down and make it come down. So there's blank space to work with if you wanted to. Okay, and moving along, mission statement, it gets its own page. Maybe the text is a little big, but I'm fine with that. It's put in a box, and it's put at what we call the optic center, which is about ½ inch higher than true center, top to bottom on a page. And so now we get into the policies. Emails, I like the discussion and the use of bulleted lists or guidelines. Not too crazy about the illustrative example down here. So moving on, memos, discussion. There's our illustrative example. Memos should consist of the following subsections. Again, I think adequate for this assignment, but I would expect that if you were in an organization and working on this, that after 2 or 3 months or 6 months or something like that, you would have a better feel for the real needs of this document and would develop these sections a bit further. So, okay, phone calls, and we have an image, some discussion, some kind of guidelines, bulletin boards, some discussion and some guidelines, dress code, discussion, some examples, and appropriate attire. But we might also need examples of inappropriate attire. So, cut off shorts, sandals, t-shirt, probably not the best thing to wear to work. Okay. Moving along, now we're into external communication. Again, good discussion, good guidelines, an example, but we probably need some call-out boxes to tell us what's going on. And if you're going to do an email, I would probably do a screen capture of an email in, your webmail. So make it look more like an email. Websites, they're not talking about the entire website. Looks like they're only talking about the header on it. So we have discussion, an illustrative example, and some guidelines. And external communication, press releases. So probably the best illustrative example in this particular document is that they've got all of these call-out boxes drawing your attention to what you should be paying attention to. And they've got some discussion. What's missing here are kind of the bulleted guidelines. So let me see if there's more to this document. So here are the guidelines for the press release. So maybe they should have put on the previous page, continued on next page or something. This section continued on next page. So now we're into letters, and the student is trying to do the right thing with this, but again, probably needs more work. A little bit of discussion, just a sentence. An example, but no call-out boxes, and then the guidelines down here. So again, probably a situation where the longer you live with the document, the more you see where it really needs to be fixed. So finally, under external communication, social media, some discussion, and then some guidelines down here, and appendices. So I don't think they're included in this document. In fact, oh, I see what it is. It's an index, because I was noticing that we're at page 18 here, and all of these numbers are smaller than 18. So they're referring you backwards into the document. Sometimes people go to the table of contents first. Sometimes the table of contents is not helpful, and they'll go to the index and then do that. And there's actually a function in Microsoft Word that'll help you set up an index. So let me return to my notes, my slides here. Okay, so I didn't spend a whole lot of time on professional examples. Maybe the most relevant to you are the student examples, but do be aware that those professional examples are there. Search for them through Google, or go onto our D2L page and go down to the examples that I've linked up as resources under the Document Standards Manual. And I hope that kind of explains everything. Good luck putting this document together. Email me or set up a Zoom conference with me if you have any questions. And I look forward to seeing your work as you progress through this assignment. Thank you very much.